Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of AIHR Live. I'm here with Mark van Dongen. Mark, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Mark, could you please briefly introduce yourself?
Of course, thank you. As I said, my name is Mark. My background lies in the Army. I did military academy in the Netherlands, left the Army as a major, and since then have actually worked in HR in various international roles, both European and global roles, worked out of the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, Saudi Arabia for a number of years, and at the moment working out of Luxembourg, where I am the head of HR mining operations, for which indeed at the moment we're doing this interview while I'm in a hotel room in the US. Next to my job, I did a master's degree in psychology and later on a PhD in management sciences, where my area of expertise is leadership development.
Fantastic. Well, Mark, we're doing this interview because you're a speaker at the Digital HR Summit in Amsterdam. You'll talk about the demographics and robotization, which I think is an interesting and maybe complementary trend, because if people get older, they'll be replaced by robots. Maybe, I don't know. What are the trends that you're seeing and how will these two trends impact how people work?
Yeah, thank you. The two items are so far indeed adding on to each other. If you're looking at the demographics perspective, we get the probably very positive side that we're going to stay and live a lot longer all together. Because of the fact of how the social systems in countries are built up, it means that we're going to have to work a lot longer. And then a lot longer doesn't mean to 70, as some people with fear are already looking at that companies are moving to the pension age. No, we're talking at 80. And indeed, companies are absolutely not set up to deal with people working until the age of 80. On the other hand, you see indeed the automation drive, where transactional work or lower added value work, people are more and more looking, okay, can we not automate that? Can we not replace that by robots? Where then at the end, of course, also the question comes that we have a lot of people who work in those kind of roles. What kind of work are people going to do in the future? Because if we would indeed replace their work and literally, bluntly speaking, send them home, who is going to pay for their unemployment benefits if less and less people are working? Now, we know good old communist model where everybody has a basic income, but I think we've seen over the world that hasn't really worked well. So on the one hand, we see this topic coming up, and on the other hand, we see nobody thinking about how do we solve the issues that might be generated by robotization, in combination indeed with the fact that we need to keep people a lot longer at work, not shorter.
Yeah.
And these two items are actually, I'll prove it from an economic perspective, that indeed purely the replacement of people by digitization or by robotization is economically not viable. So we need to think about other solutions, and I think we don't do that well enough. And I hope indeed that the speech I'll do will simply trigger people to think about the topics from a different perspective.
Yeah, so in the speech you'll dive, of course, in much more detail. Can you give the listeners and the viewer already one potential tip on how to solve this issue? Because it sounds like a very big issue.
Oh, how to solve it is a good question, of course. But one of the items is that if you look at the people getting older, as I said, one of the basic consequences becomes that you have to work a lot longer. You have to start keeping these people integrated. And as an example, ArcelorMittal, the company in which I currently work, we are having now in one of our sites in Bremen, northern Germany, we're having a trial in, okay, how can we actually keep the older people engaged, but also what kind of roles are available in the work, because we are a steel factory. So a lot of the day-to-day work they can't do anymore because physically it's too tasking for them. Yeah. So what kind of roles can these people move into? I mean, we see there we're trying out putting them much more in mentor roles or in helping young people find their bases in the organization. And we don't do that alone. We are now doing that together with the Chamber of Commerce in Bremen, who also see that, hey, this is a challenge coming up. They don't have the tools to do everything on their own. We don't have the tools to do everything on our own. But together, we are now working on a concept on how this is possible. And we base that again on a research which a colleague of mine has done indeed on the way older people learn.
Yeah.
Because from a pragmatic perspective, we in companies, we think about the learners in our classroom are, say, mid-30, mid-40, perhaps. Yeah. We're not thinking about learners in the classroom who are 70. Yeah. But people learn different. And that's what we're now trying out. Okay, what would work actually to keep those people engaged and effective to a higher age.
Yeah. So what kind of skills do you then teach these people? Because if you've been working in a coal mine, one of the optimists would say, "Hey, we're going to teach them coding, and they're going to be world-class coders." That's going to be tricky. What kind of skills do you teach them?
In this case, for indeed the more senior colleagues, we much more go back to their softer skills actually.
Yeah.
We find out that the more senior people, typically those are skills which have been honed over time. I can only speak about myself. When I was indeed 18, 19, I thought my social skills were fantastic, but I'm not sure if my environment thought the same way. When you get older, you get more rounded in your social skills.
Yeah.
So indeed, why don't we make a good use of them? Plus, for them, it's often very rewarding. On the one hand, indeed, to share their experience, because one of the things I do as well is I teach at a business school, and the reason why I do that is because I think slowly I have something to say, not just from an academic perspective, but from an experience perspective. And those people do the same. They can relate back to their experience and share that much more than sharing the technical details. They share indeed how to work more effectively in the organization. And you find that it's extremely rewarding for them. And indeed, not just to keep them engaged, but also models like I've experimented with in other companies as well, to slowly retire them, which means, for instance, you go from 100% to 80% work to 60% work, etc. And that work then slowly changes. So they keep a linkage with the working population. They're not out of it all of a sudden, because we have a number of people, specifically in our company, we have huge seniorities in the company, who work 40 years for an employer. Mm-hmm. To send home on retirement is almost a punishment to some people.
Yeah.
Keep them now engaged, just say 1-2 days a week, but they keep connected to the company, they have contact with other people, their minds keep busy. Those are kind of models we're now thinking of.
Yeah, they keep adding value, and they see themselves that they keep adding value, so it's meaningful what they do.
Yeah.
And that's very important. So how does this all change the role of HR? Because I think the trend that you're now talking about, it's very recognizable. And if I look, for example, to the story going around for truckers who will be maybe replaced for a big percentage in 10 years, train operators which might be replaced or automated within 5 years, at least. In the Netherlands, for example, it's a discussion. So how do you, as an HR department, how do you cope with those kinds of tremendous strategic changes?
Well, I think one of the roles that HR has, and let's put it this way, also HR should also take, because that's of course a different discussion, is indeed that we have to make the business aware that these changes are coming. Because logically, the business people are focused on, so to speak, what they are paid for, running the business now and looking in strategic how the business environment might change. But it is our job to put also the people topic on the agenda. And if we are saying, hey, ladies and gentlemen, we see that on the demographic front, you're missing out on a topic, and this might be a risk or an opportunity for the organization in the longer run. Mm-hmm. That is a topic we should bring forward, and not just by saying, hey, we think that. No, data. Just bring data to the table. Everybody understands data, and that is slowly getting more and more data available of not the solution, as you were referring to, but at least that there is really a challenge coming on the horizon, which we just can't keep ignoring. And I think it's very important for HR to bring the topic to the table and support the discussion based by knowledge, which is based on data.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. Now, I want to take a step back, because we're basically talking about automation, and robotization is the I wouldn't say threat, or maybe the big opportunity on the long-term horizon. A lot of organizations, before they start worrying about robotization, are still very much worrying about digitization. How do I, get my workforce digital? How do I digitize most of my HR processes, most of my business processes? So what I'm interested in is to take the step back and how do you see the digitization impacting how employees are managed on a very practical scale within ArcelorMittal?
Well, the digitization at the end, of course, is, as you say, is linkage of people, processes, and for instance, machines through the common use of data or the accessibility of data. One of the beautiful challenges we are having, of course, since a year now, is this beautiful GDPR, the data protection regulation, which seems to be in a different direction there, where digital is going towards.
Yeah.
But actually, from my perspective, there is a huge opportunity. Digital or digital HR, I don't see as a threat. What digital would allow us is, through the use of big data, is that we can actually much better than we did in the past find out how we can create a more effective working environment. In the past, we did it traditionally every 2 years or something. We do an engagement survey where we, by just asking questions, try to figure out how people are happy. But if you use actually big data, you can much better look into what really drives effective working and what creates a better working environment, and get the feedback through the data in, okay, if you create a working environment that makes people more effective, most likely they're also happier in their role, because people want to be meaningful, want to add value to an organization. And I really think digital would enable us to do that and spend less time on a number of transactional activity or administrative activities that now still need to be done.
Yeah. Can you maybe give an example of, because you're head of HR, can you maybe give an example of a process that used to be non-digital and that is now digital, and how that changed how people are interacting with that process?
Well, one of the things we are now looking into is the whole topic of recruitment and selection. The first step in the recruitment and selection is the so-called is the sourcing, which is, where do I find people? Now we're going to do that, and we're working in this case with an outsourced company, because we don't see it as our core business. With an outsourced company where we are looking at finding future talents before we have vacancies, so before we have anything on the market that they might be interested in. So trying to find where these people are and trying to remain in touch with them. And we remain in touch with them by trying to find out, okay, what are these people interested in? As an example, they might either work somewhere else or they might still study. So how can we make them interested in a company like ours, which is a full business-to-business company? They will never see a product of us just sort of driving around the street, although 60% of the cars have ArcelorMittal steel in there, but okay.
I was about to say.
It doesn't say so on the outside. So they don't know us at all. So how do we get touch? What would drive them? And for that, there's a lot of data available that helps you to touch base already on these people without them knowing, so to speak, that in the long run, we are interested to see if these are the talents we need for the future. Now, if you then look at the whole process that people go on the web, you know yourself, no doubt, that the first CVs you submit to the web are currently checked by tools that look for keywords. Yeah. That's a trend which we're already having. On the other hand, you see there is a real weakness in that in these systems. Interesting enough, the challenges you see if you are applying on the internet, that you get these nice companies who address to you that they will rewrite your CV so the keywords are in your CV, which but de facto then means that the tool doesn't work. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to tricks it that easy. But those are, of course, things where you now see tools that go into social networks and there look for people who support certain behaviors, etc. So I think in the whole sourcing and the recruitment topic, a lot is going to be digitized there. The first robots are there indeed to do the first, not the selection interviews themselves, but indeed interpret facial behaviors to see how people are reacting. Well, it's still relatively in its infancy, but it's going to come, of course. Yeah. And I don't think it'll come fast as a decision tool, but as a decision support tool. It's like assessment centers. You don't base your decision only on that, but it is a second area of information where you say, hey, I have this feeling about the employee. This is what the tool says. Do they align? Then most likely we are right. If they don't align, okay, this is something interesting to look at. Yeah. And I think if we're looking at it that way, our decisions will simply get better. And I think there's nothing negative about a decision being good, because if you find the right employee, and hence the employee of the future employee finds the right job, that's an upside for both sides.
Yeah, very interesting and a fantastic example. Thanks for that. So we're now basically talking about digital HR, and digital HR is one of the things that a lot of people are talking about in the market space. If you had to, because you're an academic at heart, and that's something I really like. If you would be to conceptualize, if you would have to define digital HR, what does it mean? What is digital HR to you?
Digital HR, that's a good question. I mean, in principle, it means indeed that digital HR for me is the process that supports at the end let's call the traditional title HR business partners.
Mm-hmm.
These are the people that work together with the business and make the business, and on the one hand make the business successful, and indeed also trigger the business to look into the right directions when it comes to people perspective. At the moment, a large amount of time of these business partners is still spent in supporting the business with all kinds of, relatively speaking, low added value tasks.
Yeah.
Digital HR will take that area away, will manage what I say. The digital HR will manage the standard processes.
Yeah.
Whereas you can focus on the exceptions, because exceptions remain needed, because not all people are the same. And indeed focus on better being able to help the business drive forward, and losing less time on areas that don't really matter that much in the long run. That's the so-called hygiene factors.
Yeah. So a lot of the, if I summarize it correctly, a lot of the more administrative, mundane tasks will be automated. They will be gone. The HR business partner or the HR administrator will be more focused on the exceptions, the flags that pop up in the system. Hey, this might be something wrong. We need a human to check this. And then because everything is automated to a higher degree, there is more data. We can make more data-driven decisions, and the HR business partner will have a slightly more tactical or even strategic role in making better decisions supported by data.
Yeah, if a very simple example in this was a trend which almost 20 years ago, when we were talking about cafeteria systems for benefits. Why the cafeteria system for benefits? That was that in principle you have a budget at your availability, and you can choose what you wanted to do with that.
Yeah.
You can put in more pension, or you can say, no, I want holidays extra. No, I want the car wash at work.
Yeah.
Most of the companies who implemented it found out that 90% of the people didn't use it.
Yeah.
And why did a lot of companies not implement it? Because it was far too administrative cumbersome.
Yeah.
Of course, if you're looking at digital HR and you have a system that manages this, it is relatively speaking easy, because it needs almost no human intervention. Yeah. You simply have a tool, and you can, between brackets, play in that tool. Yeah. And the consequence come to the employee. Why do I, as a head of HR, need to know about that, what an individual chooses? Yeah. They have the budget, and the system is arranged. So it's a self-runner. It could add value to the person. Making switch is very easy. Yeah. Versus no administrative load to HR at all.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's like a mass customization for the employee. They can all take their own personalized package, the one that they're most happy with.
Erik, when you buy a car, where do you first see your car? You see it on the tool of the car brand, where you build it yourself. Yeah. Why can't we do that with certain packages? That they say, you know what, I want to try out to do a little bit more holiday, and I think I can do with a little bit less salary. Yeah. Why can't I try this? And then it is our task, indeed, as HR, to say, you know what, dear Erik, until the age, for instance, of 30, you can touch your benefits, which is pension, but beyond that you can't, because I need to protect you, so that at the end of your career you have a pension. Yeah. But that's not up to us.
Yeah, not at 67, but at 80 at that time, if I understand you correctly. So what I'm very interested, that's an excellent example, by the way. What I'm very interested in is you specialize, you did your PhD on the area of leadership development. Yeah. How do you see digital HR enable the field of leadership development?
Yeah, this is a question I get indeed more often. There you have the academic differentiation between leadership and management, of course, where leadership is managing the people, and management is indeed managing the tools that manage people. Yeah. So, management perspective, you see a large impact of digital, of course, because the tools available, the data available, will change, will become much better, but therefore also the impact of your decisions So the impact becomes bigger of your decisions, but you'll also see the effect of your decisions come back quicker because you have access to the data behind it, which in the past we did. From a leadership perspective, if we're talking about touching people, really what changes there? That is a very good question. One of the things I described a book on, I wrote a book on leadership development, and I start actually off in the first example of leadership development, meaning building of the pyramids in Egypt a few thousand years ago, where I proved that there was already a matrix structure in place there. There was already leadership there. So what really did change, although the world around us changed, we are still changing behavior of people in order to make them pursue the target we find important. So in my view, the area of leadership will focus potentially even more on the person behind the employee, so to speak. Yeah. Because all the other processes will slowly be managed or at least taken care of by robotized systems. So people will go for their leader much more for the human interaction element of the job.
Yeah.
So I think the emphasis on leadership will by no means be less in a more digitized environment.
Yeah, so organization as a sort of pyramid structure where you have a leader and a number of people who work towards the same goal, or a number of leaders maybe, if you take a more modern approach where everyone is a leader, you still keep that structure, and that might even become more important instead of less important.
Yeah, the structure, the difference will be indeed that, as you now say, now traditionally we have the pyramid structure, and in those system-enabled environment, there are a lot of more possibilities from an organization. Why does one boss have to have 3 people working for them? You'll have virtual teams. There are all kinds of possibilities which are enabled by the tools that are there. Yeah. So we're going to ask more from leaders. On the one hand, they need to reach out to their people and keep this human interaction. And on the other hand, the elements like trust become much more important. Yeah. People will sit in the same office like you, probably not even in the same country as you. Yeah. And you will be virtually connected to them. Nevertheless, you have to be confident, you have to be trustworthy, that if you come to an agreement and then you don't see that individual for another week, that person's going to work on it. And if they have challenges, that they come back to you.
Yeah. Yeah, and that also, of course, involves challenges of how do you work together, how do you lead with a fully digital team, which requires different skill sets than having a team in the office present, because you can interact in a different way.
And then the question of how do you create a team feeling if the team fits almost is never together?
Yeah. As a final question, Mark, a question that I would love to ask you is, we're talking about robotization, about digitization, so jobs are going to disappear, and we know all of that, but instead of those jobs, new jobs will appear, will be created. So which jobs in HR, and I know this is a difficult question for you to ask, to you, which jobs in HR do you think will disappear in the next, say, 5 years, and which new jobs might be created?
I think in HR, the traditional transactional roles, the HR administrator roles, those roles will disappear, will be replaced, not necessarily all by indeed a human-machine interaction or an interface, but a number of them as well. But still, you need to have a human person to go to. Will they be replaced? That is at the end the question, of course. The total amount of jobs will reduce somewhat. That is true. Mm-hmm. But what is also very much true is, and there's a lot of studies done in that field, is that the roles will change, yes, but they won't really disappear. For all the jobs disappearing at the moment, new jobs are going to come into place. I think our real challenge is, how do we make the people who did the transactional work thus far, how do we get them into new jobs in the new digitized environment? And we shouldn't sometimes also kid ourselves. The majority of the people we're talking about does not have an academic degree. 15 to 20% of people in Europe have an academic degree, which is already a scaring amount, but okay. Whereas if we're talking about the modern employee, we're always talking about people that work from home, that can do things, etc. But if I'm looking in the environment I work in, the majority of the people who work in industry are machine-based, have a role that is machine-based or machine-linked. They cannot work remotely. Yeah. So these are all interesting concepts, but for them it won't touch them. Yeah. So these roles If we start automating, of course, some of those roles will disappear, and we need to find out, on the one hand, what other roles these people can do. And one of the demographic trends we didn't touch on, of course, is the reduced birth rate in Europe. So in the long run, we see less people entering the labor market.
Yeah.
So in so far, that certain roles disappear doesn't have to be a threat, because it could initially just pick up on the reduced intake in the market. Yeah. So I think overall it's just an extremely interesting time. What is going to happen? And I'm no doubt in a number of my assumptions I'm totally wrong, which is fine.
Yeah,
but I think
absolutely.
It's always most important to think about it, so that at least you are in your mind prepared for what is happening, instead of just being surprised by what is going to take place in the future.
I couldn't agree more. And while you were talking, I think I thought about 5 or 10 new different questions that I could ask to follow up, but we're running out of time. I would love to ask those questions maybe another time, Mark. But for now, thank you very, very much for a very interesting talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.